All right, let's get started. Thank you all for joining us. We have a nice little intimate crew here. We're really excited to really dive into environmental justice storytelling for impact with you guys. So thank you for joining us. I hope you're enjoying the food because I know everyone rushed to that table as soon as they got here. Just some quick introductions. My name is Cameron Oglesby. I am coming to this space as an environmental justice journalist and storyteller. This is very much a passion project, and so it's really exciting to see everyone expressing an interest in this topic with us. The purpose of today's event, Environmental Justice Storytelling for Impact, is understanding that is one of the greatest barriers in addressing not only environmental justice issues, but likely environmental issues generally, climate change, the sort of collapse of society as we know it, is how do we effectively communicate these issues for a multitude of audiences? We're talking about the general public, we are talking about politicians, we're talking about corporations, we're talking about people young, elders, I'm not gonna say old, but our elders, everybody from across the spectrum. And we're hoping in this program to highlight the broad spectrum of storytelling opportunities for you guys as aspiring storytellers, journalists, communicators, consultants, if that's what you're going to do. Having an understanding of how to communicate these issues is going to be critically important to making sure we address them, not only intentionally, but impactfully, storytelling for impact. So our first speaker, I'm just gonna dive right into it. His name is Eileen Trần. She is a Vietnamese-American creative director, designer, and creative coder based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She oversees creative direction at Intersectional Environmentalist, a nonprofit and climate justice collective created to radically imagine a more equitable form of environmentalism through intentional and ethical design practices and a deep understanding of intersectionality and history. She uses visual design as an education tool to subvert systems of oppression and as a way to advocate for self-determination and rest. Eileen has played a pivotal role in Intersectional Environmentalists, becoming a leading resource for environmental justice education. You'll see there's Intersectional Environmentalists, a little description. There's a link to their website if you want to learn more about the work that they're doing around education, social media, content creation. Across the board, they've become a real symbol for the next generation of environmental justice actors and advocates. So we're really excited that Eileen could join us today. And let's give a round of applause for Eileen.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me today. First, I want to say thank you to Cameron for organizing this. And I want to thank you all for, joining today in this auditorium to talk about storytelling. I think storytelling is a really important tool, especially in the environmental justice space. So I'm excited to learn about all the different ways that we can storytell. So I'm going to share my screen. And we'll have a Q&A at the end, so please jot down any questions that you may have, and hopefully I can answer them. So today we're going to be going over impactful storytelling, and I'll be talking about something called radical imagination for environmental justice. And Cameron gave a really good introduction to IE, but I'll also give a little bit more background and a little bit of what we do at IE other than social media. So if you're not familiar with IE is a climate justice collective radically imagining a more equitable and diverse future for environmentalism. We are Black founded and women of color led environmental education nonprofit that's shifting the narrative of environmental storytelling to center diversity and joy. We have a growing community of over 500,000 people, and we offer resources and events that reach millions of people around the globe each year. So a little bit about our mission and some of our other offerings and programmatic offerings. We also host community-driven climate justice concerts. We also each month we give away free books written by authors of color, and we also produce hundreds of educational resources about the intersection between climate and culture. We mostly live on social media, on Instagram, and we produce a lot of graphics, a lot of resources on Instagram. We host online events, and just last year we started doing in real life events. So I'll talk a little bit about that later. But with IE, we know that when communities of color are included in the environmental decision-making movements and educational systems, the future of environmentalism will be more equitable, will be brighter, and more revolutionary for all. So just to give a little bit of a primer on environmental justice, I'm going to assume most of you know about environmental justice, but I also want to speak to some historical context as well, if you're not aware. So where did environmental justice come from? In 1991, there was the National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit, where around 300 Black, Indigenous, Latina, Asian American, Pacific Islander, and other minority groups gathered in DC to study the 17 principles of EJ for the first time in US history. And these were environmental injustices that their community were experiencing. So they all came together and, organized the National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit. And again, this was in 1991. And then I also want to speak to the Combahee River Collective. So IE was coined because a path was paved by the Combahee River Collective, an organization of Black feminists, lesbian, socialists who experienced exclusion from mainstream feminist movements and civil rights movements of that time. So due to the overlapping identities from being Black, feminist, lesbian, they faced layered forms of discrimination. And the Combahee River Collective illuminated the fact that oppressive political economic systems are interlocked and that the liberation of Black women is vital in our fight to create a more equitable system, not just for Black women, but truly for the rest of society. So environmental justice is a goal, and intersectional environmentalism is the lens. By applying an intersectional lens to environmental justice issues today, we can collectively empower new generations of environmentalists to heal and challenge awareness around the most pressing environmental issues in universities, in communities, in different industries, and more. That was a little bit of an intro to IE and what we do. And we now get to the big question here. How do you become an effective communicator? And I want to express that everybody has a story to tell. Anybody can be a storyteller. Anybody has the power to influence, and everyone's story is valid. Your personal experiences to have the ability to bridge divides. And I say this all the time. It doesn't matter if you're in the environmental justice space. I think this applies to everybody. It doesn't matter if you have like one follower, if you have 1,000 followers or like 1 million followers. Everybody has a platform and everybody has a story to tell. And everybody has autonomy to have their voice be heard. So it doesn't matter how small or big your platform or who you are. It really doesn't matter, but it's how you use your voice and how you're amplifying your story. So we all have been storytelling for our entire lives. I have this image here because it makes me think of my childhood and how I used to read a lot when I was younger with my brother before bedtime. I think everybody can relate to bedtime stories, and those stories were very imaginative, was very, things that we wanted to experience, or stories that we kind of like, they were kind of like a portal and a medium of imagination for us. And I want to emphasize that everybody has already been storytelling, whether you realize it or not. And I think we lose the consciousness of storytelling as we grow older, or we don't see communication as a way of storytelling. But it's something that's instilled in all of us already, and it's something that we've been practicing for our entire lives. So we should be connecting storytelling and how we can use that as a radical tool, especially in the environmental justice space. So in relation to climate action, storytelling plays a really special role. I have this quote here by Catherine Hayhoe, who is a climate scientist and professor. And they say the most important thing you can do to fight climate change is to talk about it. And I think this is really important when we think about, what climate action is, and we often get scared, or we often, there's often a lot of doom and gloom with talking about climate change, but how can we shift that narrative? And I think the first step with anything is just to talk about it. So stories have a very unique impact, and that stories are remembered 20 times more than facts alone. Again, stories are remembered 20 times more than facts alone. And this is a quote by Dr. Jennifer Aker, a professor and behavioral scientist. To go along on that, the researchers at the London School of Business found that people retain 5% to 10% of information if it consists of statistics alone. But when they hear that information in the form of a story, they remember 65% to 70%. So we can really see the impact of storytelling, of impactful communication. And, instead of making it harder to talk about climate change, we should think of it as storytelling, as personal narratives, as, very creative, a very creative way to talk about climate change and having climate action. So stories are powerful tools. They are what drive our ability to change the dominant conversation. And I think that's a really important part, the dominant conversation. What do we know? How do we talk about climate change today? And are we happy with it? Are we how can we contribute to that conversation, or how can we navigate away from harmful discussions or conversations around climate change? And this is where storytelling comes in. So our identities are intersectional. So our stories should be as well, because the climate crisis impacts all of us in differing ways, in multitudinal ways. So our stories should reflect that as well. And this is where I want to introduce radical imagination. If you haven't heard of it, I'll go into this a little bit. It's something that IE has kind of been made more aware of in the past year, especially as we talk about the impact that we want, or the future that we want, really. Again, we have practiced, I think we've all practiced this since we were young. When we think about imagination, we think about daydreaming, or we think about distractions even. But radical imagination can be a really powerful tool to think about what future do we want? What future do we want to build? And especially when it comes to climate change, we often know what we want to dismantle, what the oppressive systems are, what the harmful systems are. But how can we change the narrative to be what is this beautiful future that we want? What is the optimistic future that we want? And again, this is something that we've all had instilled in us when we were little. Like, what do we want to be when we grow up? What do we want to do when we grow up? What is the future that we want for society, for ourselves, for our children? So this is a quote by Leah Thomas. She is the founder of IE, And this kind of what sparked the conversation on radical imagination, because IE kind of started out as a grassroots organization, really community oriented. And I think we knew the oppressive systems that we were living under. We knew what was wrong with our society, but we never really defined what the future looks like and how we can build it or how we can get there. But I think the first step is really just imagination. So she says, if someone were to ask me last year or in 2022 or in 2020, what is the future that I am building towards? I couldn't answer it with as much clarity, and that made me sad because I think it's important to understand the systems that you are dismantling, but it's even more important sometimes to think of the beautiful future that you want to create. Joy is such a powerful motivator when shame can never motivate you in the same way. We talk a lot about joy as well, because of course, with talking about climate change, it brings a lot of anxiety or negativity. But again, like what is the dominant conversation and how can we change it? So that's why we've been talking a lot about climate optimism. We talked a lot about joy. So using creativity and optimism to clearly understand what your goal or story is. I think this is the first step of making impact. You need to understand what your story is and how you can communicate it and understand more clearly what is the future that you want. You are the dreamers of our future. I've been thinking a lot about, along with radical imagination, I've been thinking about, dream work or dreamers and the work of dreamers, and the impact that dreamers have for the future. So I want to tell you all that you have potential to be part of this future. You are the dreamers of this future. Just climate storytelling actively facilitates the world's understanding of what we know to be the true of our own culture, heritage, and histories. You share the hopes in strength. And then next, I have a quote by Ella Baker. I think that really speaks to clearly understanding where we are, but also where we want to go. So she says, one of the things that has to be faced is, in the process of wanting to change that system, how much have we got to do to find out who we are, where we have come from, and where we are going? So it's not only learning about the future and knowing the future that we want, but also where did we come from and how can we amplify certain things or learn from our history. Their history has a lot to offer to us, and especially when it comes to our elders, when it comes to learning about different cultural backgrounds and how they have contributed to like climate action, and how can we apply those learnings to today. So it's holistically learning about the past, the present, and the future. So how can we focus on the impact of storytelling? I'm going to be going over a variety of mediums that you can use for impactful storytelling, as in give you different examples of how people have been storytelling, either in the past or present. I think my examples are more present-based, but I want to emphasize that this is really just examples and a list of case studies, but it's truly not the end. There are really creative ways to have impactful storytelling, and I invite you to think about what that means for yourself. I'm the creative director of IE, so I'm very, based on graphics and visuals and typography even, and all of that plays a role in impactful storytelling. But I know, journalists, for example, or content creation, social media, all play a role in impactful storytelling. So the first example is storytelling through voice. And if you've ever been to a protest or rally before, you have practiced storytelling through voice and collective action. And this is just a photo of youth protesters in South Africa. If you haven't been to a protest or rally, I really invite you to be there and to also learn about the organizing work that's behind them, because I think I went to my first rally in like freshman year, and just hearing about the collective work that students, community members have all put together to organize this, and also raise awareness about certain things with the public, I think is a really unique way to storytell through voice, and it's local, location specific. And then the next example is through stage or theater. I don't know if there's any theater folks here, but this is just one example of storytelling through stage. And the Climate Change Theater Action is a group that performs a series of climate change plays, and they usually coincide with the United Nations COP meeting. So this is one creative way to storytell. And then, if you've all watched a movie, you've all taken photos before, and what happens when you think of that as a medium to storytell. Um, we all storytell through different ways, and even our Instagram page is a way that we storytell. So we've all been storytelling in different platforms, and this example that I have here is a film by the Redford Center, which highlights the growing interest in mushrooms and fungi. And this film specifically focuses on the indigenous woman and the cultural context, the story, the connection between indigenous women and mushrooms. And of course, through pen and paper, storytelling can be through a book, an essay. I'm sure you've all written many essays in your time at Duke. This is a book. The book that I have featured here is called Everyday Stories of Climate Change, which is an educator guide and graphic novel that provides support for teachers and students on the global impacts of climate change. And I think as we, and I've been seeing a lot of books about climate change, about climate optimism, about climate action. This year and last year, Leah Thomas released her book last year, and there are many members of our community who are coming out with books. So books, pen and paper, poetry, even, like, these are all ways that we can storytell. And my favorite example of storytelling is through music and art. Just last year, IE started hosting these climate concert series called Earth Sessions. And we have a lot planned for this year, but music and art is totally a medium that you can use to talk about climate change, talk about impactful storytelling in a very unique lens. Last year, we had hip hop artists and indigenous environmental activists, Shutezkat, who proudly vocalized his passion for environmental justice through his music. And this is a photo from the event that we had last year. And then the last example that I have is through experiences. So our friends at Outdoor Afro, the organization, organized a trip to kayak down the Combahee River in commemoration of the history from, the Combahee River Collective, the Combahee River, learning about the ecosystem there, learning about the history there. And the organization Outdoor Afro just organized a kayak trip. And, this is an experience, this is a way to storytell and also connect past and present. So this is a very unique experience that they used to talk about, climate history, climate change, and how we can be connected with history. And I think this is a section that I really wanted to emphasize, especially at the end of near the end of this presentation, is that for true impact, you will feel uncomfortable. And I've been letting you know that, radical imagination is a really beautiful, joyful, revolutionary practice, but with true impact comes hard work. And I think with any kind of success, you will feel uncomfortable or discomfort. But I've learned that discomfort can really be a teacher for us. It can make us grow. It can make us learn and adapt to new settings. It can just be a really great tool for growth. So this is just something that I always keep in mind whenever I, am really fighting through communicating a hard topic within climate change, or honestly with anything. When I'm finding myself struggling, I often know that it's because one, I really care about the cause, and two, I think everybody will have haters. Simply put, like, with growing with IE, we've learned to listen. We've learned to work with our community. And I think in order for us to make true impact, we have to work together. We have to listen. We have to struggle together. And I think that's present throughout history. When we're fighting for a certain cause, especially when there is an oppressive system, we will get some pushback. But I want to let you know and remind you that the work that you're doing is impactful and shouldn't discourage you from talking about climate change or, the future that you want. And then the second thing that I want to emphasize is that we should be collaborating with one another instead of competing. And often when you're in a space, the environmental justice space, there are so many resources, there's so many organizations that are doing similar work. It's, sometimes you shouldn't, invent something new. Instead, you should be collaborating with one another. You should be working with other people, because at the end of the day, you have people who support you, who believe in you, and working within a community, I think has greater impact. Also, with any work with climate action, it's pretty emotionally exhausting. So having a support system, having a community is going to be really important. With IE, because we understand that, there's also a lot of grassroots organizations, smaller organizations that are doing similar work. It's best that we amplify one another instead of thinking of it as competition. And so this is the last slide. I kind of want to leave with this. As somebody who is a creator, as somebody who is creative, and as I emphasized in the beginning, we all have a voice, we all have a platform, we all have a support system, we all have the power to use our voice. This is just something that I saw on Instagram one day, and I think it's really impactful to think about when you feel discouraged about voicing your opinion or voicing about the future that you want. 10% of people think about creating. Of that 10% who think about creating, 10% actually do it. And of that 10% will continue to create. So whenever you think about whether you should be doing something, or whether you feel like, I don't know, whether you feel discouraged, just do it. And I think you'll begin to realize that you have a lot of people who believe in you, that want to work with you, and that want to amplify your messaging. I have imposter syndrome a lot as a creative, and maybe some of you can relate to that. But I especially had that a lot when I was a student. But I think we have to value the work that we do. And without that, I think we can't have true impact without realizing that the work that you're doing is valuable. So just want to leave with that. Thank you so much for listening to me. And I'm here to answer any questions. Hopefully, I'll also be able to give you all my email, or you can connect with me on IE's platform. But yeah, hopefully we can have a conversation on what storytelling is and what it means to you.
Thank you so much, Eileen. I know that left me with a ton of questions. There are mics here in the back for people who have questions. I also want to make a note to everybody, a lot of the examples that Eileen spoke to, whether outdoor Afro, or some of the movements, the environmental justice movement, there are a lot of points of connection to work we are attempting to do on campus. We tried to bring Rumak, the founder of Outdoor Afro, to campus for Earth Month, and she was very interested in joining us, so it might happen next semester. Ooh. So please feel free to stand up and ask your questions as they come to you. Perhaps I can start us off with, you really emphasized that's at the front, understanding our history. I know that's something that was in your bio as a really important first step in your work as a storyteller. Do you have any advice for people who are trying to get acquainted with the deep and nuanced history of environmental justice prior to becoming a storyteller themselves?
Yes. So yes, history is really important, especially in the past 2 years. As you mentioned, I am Vietnamese American, and I think learning about my history, and this applies to anybody, but learning about one's history is going to be really important to understanding the future that you want, and also it'll aid you to figure out how to get there. For example, I'm in a weekly book club with my brother, and we talk about the impacts of, for example, the Vietnam War, or we talk about colonialism, which is something at IE we talk about. We have oppressive systems because of the results of war, of genocide, of discrimination, and things like the movements that came out of the 60s and 70s, including the civil rights movement, or the feminist movements that I mentioned. I don't know, I think it's really important to learn from those and understand that we are kind of reliving history. We are currently in a climate movement. We are in a movement, and how can we really give credit to the people before us, to the elders before us, and learn from them. And there's a lot of nuance with understanding history, so that's why I think it's really important that you have they have somebody to talk to. For example, I talk with my brother. We're both learning about our histories and how it relates to our society today. There's a lot of nuance with learning about environmental justice history, in terms of, I think the context back then it can be misconstrued, or it can be misinterpreted. So that's why we emphasize the community a lot, and learning from your community, and also learning from the resources from the community as it pertains to environmental justice. But hopefully that makes sense. Yeah.
That was great. That did answer my question. Thank you so much, Eileen. I see Ian over here with a question. Go ahead, Ian.
Thanks so much, Cameron, and thank you so much for all the work that you do. Speaking on this topic of history for a little bit, I wanted to dive a little bit more deeply into the history of environmentalism, because in the work that I did before Duke in environmental and climate advocacy from the nonprofit lens, I found that there were sometimes tensions and struggles in making intersectionality more than just a buzzword, right? And that different people who had been historically marginalized or left out of a predominantly, white-dominated, upper middle class environmental movement that there were definitely growing pains to making intersectionality real and kind of building authentic, trusting relationships between these organizations that exist to do environmental work and very much want to partner with communities, but communities feeling like they weren't always given a seat at the table or even the chance to build their own thing, perhaps. So I'm curious if you could speak to ways in which you have seen or ways in which you think storytelling as a tool might help to build trust among folks that have similar goals in this space but come from very different histories as far as their power.
Okay, I think I understand the question. Yeah, I think, again, like we can learn so much from history. We don't have to reinvent the wheel because chances are, some collective in history, a movement in history has made the plan for you. And I think, one way that that nonprofits today or organizations today can really learn or take from or emphasize or amplify history is, I think for IE especially, we've been focusing a lot on events, especially on a local scale. We have a lot of, the events are, like I mentioned, they're really joyful climate concerts, but in them, there's a lot of climate education. We'll have panel discussions. We will invite different individuals with different backgrounds, either professors, artists, or designers or journalists, to come together to talk about how they interpret climate change in their field and how history has played a part in it. I think we've been working with a lot of youth and youth community organizers, and time again, I think IE has always brought up like historical context, because there's a lot of things, there's a lot of, I don't know, I often find that a lot of people may not know about like the Combahee River Collective or, that conference that happened in 1991 to talk about the 17 principles of environmental justice, and bringing together local communities is going to be really important. We have a balance of like communities in person and also virtual events. And that's why I really like engagements like this, where I can speak to a community in a certain area or reach a community in a certain area and still have impact. But yeah, I'm kind of rambling on, but I think events and community organizing is going to play a really big role, but also understanding where we came from, understanding that this is native land, understanding that it's going to take a lot of different perspectives to come together to build the narrative that you want. But listening and communicating with your community is going to be really important to understand also what the community wants and not just yourself. But yeah.
Hi. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really love this concept of radical imagination. I know I personally can be someone that gets stuck in the mindset of everything I want to break down and not always focusing on how I would want to build it. I'd love to hear a little bit more about how your team has really taken on that as your approach, and in particular, how that changes the way that you're telling stories here.
Yeah, I think we practice radical imagination in really big and small ways. Like, for example, like every other Friday, we have like visioning sessions where we talk about what we want from as a platform, what we want to start doing, what we want to start incorporating into our programs. And in the past year, we launched, like, for example, our IE free bookstore. I think it was at the tail end of last year. So this is a really recent thing, but we began to realize in current events and in the news that a lot of schools are banning critical race theory books or books surrounding certain topics, even about climate change. And we started to realize that, and it was affecting our communities as well. Like, how can we bring forth resources and education to communities like that? And that's when we started doing book giveaways and making it accessible um, by providing them for free. And then another example is, of course, like our sessions, which I keep talking about, but it's something that I can't even comprehend because this is something that we came up with. And like, I remember like the first meeting, we're like, how can we connect music and art into talking about climate change and climate action? And how can we foster a really joyful environment to talk about and to learn about climate education? And we started hosting really small events, like less than 50 people, sometimes 20 people would show up. And it started growing and growing. And again, this is kind of like, how can we shift the narrative on how we talk about climate change? And how can we use creativity and art in that process? And we this is a big thing, but we're actually starting a tour this summer, and it's becoming really part of our programming and something that we really want to emphasize, that music and art can really change how we talk about climate change, and in a different way to really focus on climate optimism rather than talking about the doom and gloom that comes with talking about climate change. Those are just two examples. I could go on and on, but um, um, I would want to talk to you if you want to like shoot me an email or something. We can talk about radical imagination for hours. But yeah.
Well, thank you. Hey, Eileen, thank you again for chatting with us today. It's been great to glean some of your wisdom and hear about your experience in this space. So in my role in the Office of Sustainability here at Duke, I do a lot of engagement work, and communication storytelling is a big part of that. I was wondering if you want to share a little bit of your advice or approach for storytelling for a wide audience, and thinking about meeting people where they're at and how to be most effective when the audience that you're working with and trying to engage in very different spaces. So just would love to hear a little bit about your thought and perspective on meeting such a wide range of folks where they're at.
Yeah. I think this is something that we have. I think with time, it will come naturally where, your audience will build. And I think this applies to storytelling in general. But again, I think community is going to play a big role in the way that you can't do everything yourself, and in order to reach a wider audience, you kind of have to work within a really strong community, and also understand, again, how, like, what is the communication? Like, for example, I don't even know if I mentioned this, but IE is 6 people. We're 6 women, and we, like, one person can't do everything. And so it's really integral to have, whatever your community is, to have a plan, to have different backgrounds. I think that's going to be really important. Like, I am not a good writer. I am not a good um, video person, but I think I have an eye for creative direction, or I also work on websites, and, how can we use these different mediums to reach a wider audience? On our team, we also have like a researcher. We have a partnerships head. Leah Thomas kind of does everything, but she's really good at eco communication, and really having a really unique point of view on how to talk about certain things in a creative lens. But I'm getting at that, again, you can't do everything yourself. And I think outreach is going to be a lot of it. Sabs, who is a co-founder and the partnerships lead, does a lot of writes a ton of emails reaching out to even like legislation or smaller organizations. Recently, we were contacted by U.S. Department of Energy or of the environment. I forget, but I think with time, it will, like, as we start talking about climate change more and climate action more, your organizations will be seen, will be heard. And that's where, again, like collaboration is going to be really important. Community is going to be really important to amplify these narratives. And again, IE is a little six-person collective, but it's we've had our impact because of the community that supports us, and that allows us to show up in different spaces, like the White House, or like talking to politicians. And again, it takes a whole village. It takes a whole village. And impactful communication is going to be something that you can't do yourself. So having different heads put together is gonna, I think, have a lot more impact than like organizing yourself, or it's just gonna have a bigger impact once you have a collective that you can work within and a community that supports you. So that's why I always talk about community. It's really important in all sectors, and the government won't listen to us if we don't have a voice. And so, yeah, it's just using your platform, using your voice, and having a group of people with diverse backgrounds to work within.
Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Awesome. I think we have time for one more question. If nobody else wants to jump in with it, I know I have one last question. It's really around this balance of sort of amplifying your own voice and using that voice that you mentioned everybody has, everybody is a storyteller, versus amplifying the voices of those who have perhaps been historically underrepresented, underserved, or undercovered in the media. Do you have any advice for us as students coming from varying backgrounds, but just being here at Duke in this space, or coming perhaps with a level of privilege that our partners in Warren County or in Sampson County or other counties across the US might not be coming from, or might not have, how we can make sure that we are balancing our own voices and amplifying the voices of others?
Yes, this is a really good question, and something that I think about a lot when I think about my personal platform on Instagram, and like what messaging do I want to bring forth. And there should be a balance between like the inspiration that you take from like historical events and the unique perspective that you can bring. I think we all have a voice. We all have personal narratives that are going to be very dear to us, and sharing those stories is really important. And connecting those to historical context is really important. I think, again, with this weekly book club that I'm a part of, I'm constantly learning about history. I'm constantly learning from history. But I also think about like how can I learn from this and apply it to today, and present it where there is a connection, where there is a balance between my story and my ancestors' story. And in the same vein, you'll be just amplifying your history, our rich culture, and also, I don't know, I think through that you have more pride and more clarity of who you are, of just our rich culture that we all came from. And again, I think I just want to emphasize it, to have that unique perspective for yourself. Of course, we can always take from history and be inspired from history, but how can we really bring forth something that is parallel to that, that's something that's new and refreshing that the younger generation might not know about, or how can we present it in this generation in a new way? And again, it's this balance of learning from history, of taking from it, but also providing your own personal anecdotes, your own personal narratives, or like how you have experienced that yourself. Again, we're all from different backgrounds, and we also understand that not everybody's platforms are different too. Like, how are you using your voice not only to amplify your own voice, but amplify other people's voices, underprivileged voices, minority voices? And I wouldn't be afraid of, for example, like at IE, we always talk about Black radical women movements. And while I'm not Black myself, there's a lot of solidarity with that. And I encourage you not to be afraid to talk about or amplify underprivileged identities because you don't really identify with it, but it's the amplification that really matters. And it's also the honesty or the vulnerability that matters too with that. Yeah, that's my short answer.
Let's get another round of applause for Eileen.
Thank you.